On September 12, 1847, when they broke down the door to Marcus's cabin at Magnolia Heights Plantation in Alabama, what they found inside shouldn't have existed. Catherine Winthrop, wife of one of the state's wealthiest planters, queen of Alabama high society, a woman who commanded servants with a lifted finger, was on her knees, wearing a slave's collar with chains locked around her wrists. But that wasn't the worst part. The journal they discovered documented 10 years of nights when Catherine had crawled to this cabin, begging an enslaved man to dominate her, use her, treat her like property. And the photographs, my God, the photographs showed positions, acts, and degradations that would make grown men vomit. By the time authorities finished reading that journal, they knew 3 things for certain. Catherine Winthrop had been spying on her own husband for a decade, passing business secrets to the slave Marcus. 13 of Alabama's most powerful plantation owners had been systematically destroyed by information Catherine provided. And most shocking of all, Catherine's 2-year-old son, the heir to the Winthrop fortune, wasn't her husband's child at all. What really happened between Catherine Winthrop and the man she called Master? How did a Southern belle from one of Alabama's finest families end up as the sex slave of her own property? And why, when Marcus disappeared that September night, did he leave behind evidence that would expose not just Catherine's betrayal, but a conspiracy that reached all the way to Northern abolitionists planning to tear the South apart? Before we uncover this twisted story of obsession, manipulation, and revenge, subscribe right now, hit that bell, and comment your state below. Because what you're about to hear will disturb you in ways you never imagined. Now let me take you back to where this nightmare truly began. Mobile, Alabama, spring of 1832. A 17-year-old girl named Catherine Ashford is about to make a decision that will destroy her life. At 1, the auction. The slave auction in Mobile's Market Square stank of unwashed bodies, tobacco, and desperation. Catherine Ashford stood beside her father, a lace handkerchief pressed to her nose, watching human beings get examined like livestock. She'd seen slaves her whole life. They were everywhere in the South, invisible as furniture. But when they brought Marcus onto that platform, something inside Catherine cracked open. He was maybe 25, powerfully built, with eyes that held something Catherine had never seen in a slave before. Not fear, not submission. Something else. Something that made heat flood her body and her breath catch in her throat. The auctioneer was explaining Marcus's history. Born free in Charleston, his daddy was a blacksmith, made good money, but when the old man died, a creditor claimed debts. Judge ruled the son gets sold to pay what's owed. The auctioneer grinned. This one fought back. Resisted, needs breaking in proper, but look at that body, strong as an ox, can read and write, do figures, make an excellent house servant once you teach him his place. Catherine's father showed no interest. They didn't need more workers, and this one's reputation for resistance made him dangerous. But Catherine couldn't look away. When Marcus's eyes swept across the crowd and met hers, something passed between them. Recognition, challenge. Something Catherine didn't have words for but felt in her bones. The bidding was slow. Nobody wanted a troublesome slave. A trader from Mississippi placed a low bid, planning to resell Marcus out west where discipline was harsher. The auctioneer was about to close the sale when Catherine surprised everyone, especially herself. "Father," she said quietly, her hand on James Ashford's arm, "buy him." Her father frowned. "Catherine, we don't need." "Buy him," she repeated, her voice steady, her eyes locked on Marcus. "Every plantation mistress needs a personal servant, someone loyal to her alone. I want him." James Ashford had never denied his daughter anything. The price was reasonable given Marcus's problems. He raised his hand and bid substantially higher than the Mississippi trader. No one countered. Marcus belonged to the Ashford family. As they led him away in chains, Marcus looked back once at Catherine. And in that look, she saw something that would haunt her forever. Not gratitude, something knowing. As if he understood something about her that she didn't yet understand about herself. What Catherine didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that this impulsive decision would set in motion a chain of events that would consume her life and reveal truths about herself far more disturbing than anything society might condemn her for. 3 years passed. Marcus worked the Ashford plantation under brutal conditions designed to break his spirit. Long hours, hard labour, constant supervision, but Marcus never gave them cause for punishment. He worked without complaint, followed every order, and gradually earned a reputation as reliable. The fire in his eyes seemed extinguished. Catherine, during those same 3 years, became one of Alabama's most eligible marriage prospects. Beautiful in the way Southern society valued pale skin, delicate features, graceful manners. She could read, write, play piano, embroider. She knew French, quoted poetry, moved through social situations with practiced ease. But during those 3 years, Catherine watched Marcus from a distance, found excuses to walk past the fields where he worked, questioned her father's overseer about his behaviour. She told herself she was monitoring her investment. But at night, alone in her room, she admitted the truth. It was something else, something she couldn't name, something that terrified and excited her. In spring 1835, Catherine accepted a marriage proposal from Hamilton Winthrop, a wealthy planter 15 years older who owned Magnolia Heights, one of Alabama's most prosperous cotton plantations. Hamilton was handsome in a stern way, respected, wealthy enough to elevate the Ashford family's social standing considerably. Catherine agreed for all the practical reasons. Hamilton could provide the life expected of her. He was kind enough, if distant. He treated her with formal courtesy that passed for affection among the Southern aristocracy. As part of the marriage settlement, James Ashford gave Catherine 5 enslaved individuals from his plantation. Catherine chose carefully, 2 women as personal maids, an older man as butler, a younger woman for the kitchen, and Marcus. When Hamilton questioned her choice, "This Marcus has a history of resistance. Are you certain?" Catherine met his eyes with calm confidence. "I've watched him for 3 years, Hamilton. Whatever spirit he had is broken. I want him as my personal footman. He's intelligent, presentable, will reflect well when we entertain." Hamilton agreed. And so in June 1835, Catherine Winthrop arrived at Magnolia Heights as its new mistress, bringing with her the man who would eventually destroy everything. Magnolia Heights was everything its name suggested. Grand plantation house, white columns, crystal chandeliers, Persian rugs. Hamilton employed over 200 slaves to work 1,500 acres of prime cotton land, making him one of Alabama's largest slave owners. Catherine stepped into her role perfectly, managed the household with efficiency, planned elaborate dinner parties, presented herself as the ideal Southern lady. Hamilton was pleased with his choice of wife. But at night, alone in her bedroom after Hamilton's mechanical visits twice weekly, Catherine felt a growing emptiness that terrified her. Hamilton was considerate in the clinical way men of his class understood the term. He visited her bed, performed his marital duties with mechanical precision, then returned to his own chamber. No passion, no abandon, no loss of control. And Catherine, raised to believe proper wives didn't desire more, found herself lying awake with a hunger she couldn't name, staring at the ceiling and remembering the look in Marcus's eyes that day in Mobile. October 1837. 2 years into Catherine's marriage. Hamilton departed for Mobile on business that would keep him away a week. Catherine supervised dinner alone, ate in the formal dining room at a table set for 1, then retired upstairs pretending to read. But she couldn't concentrate. Her mind kept returning to the thought she'd been pushing away for months, maybe years. A thought so transgressive, so impossible she'd refused to acknowledge it. But tonight, with Hamilton gone and the house quiet, that thought wouldn't be silenced. Catherine stood, changed from her dinner dress into a simple dark gown, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, took up a small lamp, descended the rear staircase to the back of the house. She found Marcus's cabin easily. Light showed beneath the door. He was awake. Catherine stood in darkness, hand raised to knock, entire body trembling with terror and anticipation. She could still turn back, return to her bed, her safe, proper life. Instead, she knocked. Marcus opened the door, shirtless, holding a book, reading by candlelight. His eyes widened when he saw her. Neither spoke. Then Catherine stepped forward into the cabin and closed the door. "Do you know who I am?" she asked quietly. "Yes, Mrs. Winthrop," Marcus replied carefully. "You're my owner." "No," Catherine said, voice shaking. "I'm asking if you remember me, from Mobile, from the auction." Something changed in Marcus's expression. I remember. Catherine took a breath. I bought you. I chose you. I've been watching you for 7 years. I need to know if you've been watching me. Marcus studied her face. I've seen you, Mrs. Winthrop. I've seen how you look at me. How you walk past the fields where I work. How you find reasons to have me near you at dinner parties. So yes, I've been watching. Then you know why I'm here, Catherine whispered. Sorry I can't repeat or reproduce that text. But something fundamental had shifted. Catherine discovered that the woman who moved through her daily life, refined, proper, controlled, was a performance. A mask. Underneath that mask was someone else entirely. Someone hungry and desperate and willing to surrender everything for brief moments of feeling alive. The pattern continued for 10 years. Whenever Hamilton travelled, which he did frequently, Catherine would wait until the house slept, then slip out to Marcus's cabin. Each time the encounters became more intense, more transgressive, more psychologically complex. It wasn't about physical pleasure, though that was part of it. It was about power, or rather the surrender of power. In her daily life, Catherine wielded tremendous authority. She gave orders, made decisions, controlled every aspect of household management. But in Marcus's cabin, she had no power at all. She followed his instructions, accepted his decisions, surrendered control completely. In that surrender, she found freedom. But the relationship was not simply about Catherine's needs. Marcus had his own purposes. He'd been a free man once, educated, with prospects and dignity. That had been stolen through fraud and corruption. He'd been enslaved, beaten, broken down until he learned to hide his intelligence and rage behind compliance. And now the wife of his owner came begging him to dominate her, to use her, to treat her as property. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus, nor was the opportunity, because Marcus had a plan, a long-term strategy for revenge against the system that had enslaved him. And Catherine, desperate Catherine with her hidden desires and need for surrender, was going to be the key to that revenge. Over those 10 years, Marcus carefully documented everything. He kept a hidden journal, written in code, recording every encounter, every conversation, every revelation Catherine made. He collected small personal items, a handkerchief, a hair ribbon, a button, evidence proving she'd been in his cabin. He also took photographs. Photography was still new in the 1840s, but Marcus had learned the technique during his years as a free man. Through careful manipulation of other slaves who worked in Mobile, he'd acquired equipment and chemicals. On carefully selected nights, he positioned Catherine in compromising positions and captured images that would destroy her if revealed. But Marcus didn't plan to use this evidence for blackmail or to gain his freedom. His plans were far more elaborate, far more devastating. He was going to use Catherine to destroy the entire Winthrop family, to dismantle their wealth and social standing piece by piece. And Catherine, blinded by her own needs, never suspected. The first sign something was wrong came in spring 1844, 7 years after that first night. Catherine became pregnant. This should have been impossible. Hamilton still visited her bed twice weekly, but Hamilton was infertile, a fact he didn't know, but Marcus had discovered through careful observation and conversations with house servants who had access to Hamilton's private correspondence with doctors. Catherine assumed the child was Marcus's. She was terrified. What if the child showed physical characteristics revealing its true parentage? What if she bore a child with dark skin? But when she frantically confessed her fear to Marcus, his response shocked her. "The child is your husband's," Marcus said calmly. Catherine stared. "That's impossible. Hamilton and I have been married 9 years and I've never conceived." "Because I've been giving your husband special tonics for 8 months," Marcus interrupted. "Herbs that improve fertility in men. The butler who serves Hamilton's evening brandy is loyal to me. I've had him adding the tonic to your husband's drink nightly. You're pregnant with Hamilton's child, Catherine. I made sure of it." Catherine's mind reeled. "Why?" Marcus smiled, not kindly. "Because Hamilton wants an heir. If you give him a child, he'll be grateful. He'll give you more freedom, more authority. He might begin trusting you with business affairs. And when you have that freedom, that trust, that access to his correspondence and financial records, you're going to start doing things for me." "What things?" Catherine whispered. "Small things at first," Marcus said. "Copying letters, reporting on Hamilton's business dealings, finding out which properties he's considering purchasing, who he's negotiating with, what political connections he's cultivating. You're going to become my spy, Catherine, my agent inside your husband's world. If I refuse, Marcus gestured to a locked trunk, then the photographs, the journal, all the evidence I've been collecting for 7 years will find their way to your husband, to the local newspaper, to the church elders. You'll be destroyed, Catherine, not just socially. Hamilton will have you committed to an asylum. You'll spend the rest of your life in chains, just as I have, so no, you won't refuse. This was the moment Catherine understood the truth. She hadn't been escaping her stifling life. She hadn't been finding freedom in surrender. She'd been trapped, manipulated, carefully groomed to become a tool in Marcus's revenge. Everything she thought she'd chosen had been an illusion. Marcus had been playing a much deeper game all along. And you think that's the worst of it? You think Catherine discovering she'd been manipulated for 7 years is where this story peaks? We haven't even scratched the surface of the horror waiting in that slave cabin. Because what Marcus did to Catherine's mind over the next 3 years, how he turned her into his willing accomplice, and the shocking truth about her son that wouldn't be revealed for another 20 years, that's when this story goes from disturbing to absolutely devastating. If this is giving you chills, share this video with someone who can handle dark historical truth. Hit that like button, and make sure you're subscribed, because the second half of this nightmare will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about power, control, and the human capacity for self-destruction. Now let's see how deep Catherine's fall really goes. Catherine gave birth to a son in January 1845. Hamilton was overjoyed. He doted on the child, named him Hamilton Winthrop Jr., rewarded Catherine with expanded authority over household and plantation business, exactly as Marcus predicted. And Catherine, trapped by the evidence Marcus held, began her new role as unwilling spy. At first, the task seemed harmless. Copy certain business letters before Hamilton mailed them, report conversations about cotton prices, land purchases, find out which banks Hamilton used, which factors he trusted in Mobile and New Orleans. Catherine complied, telling herself she was just providing information. But gradually tasks became more serious. Marcus had her steal documents from Hamilton's study, forge her husband's signature on letters, manipulate Hamilton's business relationships by spreading carefully crafted rumours through her social connections. Catherine realised Marcus wasn't just gathering information, he was systematically undermining Hamilton's business empire. Deals that should have succeeded mysteriously fell through. Investments failed. Business partners developed suspicions and withdrew. Hamilton's wealth began to slowly erode. But Hamilton, trusting his wife completely, blamed his reversals on bad luck and poor economic conditions. He never suspected that his wife's slave was the architect of his gradual ruin. During this time, Catherine's relationship with Marcus evolved into something even more twisted. The physical encounters continued, but now they were laced with power dynamics that went beyond simple dominance and submission. Marcus held Catherine's entire life in his hands. He could destroy her at any moment. They both knew it. Sometimes Marcus would make Catherine beg him not to reveal her secrets. Sometimes he'd describe in detail what would happen if the truth came out, the asylum, the public humiliation, losing her son. Other times he'd be almost gentle, almost kind, reminding her they were partners now, working together toward a common goal. Catherine began to lose her sense of self. She didn't know if she was victim or accomplice, if she was being forced or choosing to participate. The boundaries between coercion and consent had blurred beyond recognition. She hated Marcus for what he'd done. She needed him because he was the only person who knew the truth about her. She feared him. She craved him. She wanted to destroy him, and couldn't imagine life without him. By 1847, 10 years after that first night, Catherine had helped Marcus accumulate vast amounts of information about not just Hamilton's business, but about every major planter in the region. Marcus had created an intelligence network spanning multiple plantations, using enslaved individuals who served as house servants to gather and pass information. Marcus had also made contact, through intermediaries and coded letters, with abolitionist networks in the north. He was preparing something big, something that would use all the information Catherine and others had gathered to strike a devastating blow against the plantation system itself. Then everything unravelled in a single night. September 1847. The night the house staff discovered the photographs and journal in Marcus's cabin. What Catherine never knew was that Marcus had left them there deliberately, as part of a carefully planned final move. He'd wanted them to be discovered. He'd wanted the scandal to explode. Because the scandal wasn't the end of his plan, it was the beginning. The discovery happened while Hamilton hosted one of his elaborate dinner parties. Alabama's most prominent planters and their wives gathered in the parlour. Catherine was performing her role as perfect hostess when a house servant appeared in the doorway, face pale with shock, and whispered urgently to the butler. The butler approached Hamilton and said something that made colour drain from Hamilton's face. Hamilton immediately excused himself. Minutes later, Catherine found herself roughly escorted upstairs by her husband, away from dinner guests. In Hamilton's study, spread across the desk, were the photographs. The journal. Letters in Catherine's handwriting. Evidence of 10 years of betrayal laid out in undeniable detail. "Explain this," Hamilton said quietly. His rage was cold, terrifying in its controlled fury. Catherine couldn't speak. The moment she dreaded for 10 years had arrived. "How long?" Hamilton demanded. "How long have you been fornicating with that animal?" "Hamilton, please." 10 years, he said, voice shaking. "According to this journal, it's been 10 years. Almost from the beginning of our marriage. You've made a fool of me, Catherine. Degraded yourself, degraded our family, degraded everything we represent." Catherine's mind raced. Before she could respond, Hamilton spoke again. "Where is he? Where is Marcus?" "Gone, sir," the butler replied from the doorway. "He's not in his cabin. No one's seen him since this afternoon." Hamilton's eyes narrowed. He knew. He knew he was about to be discovered, so he ran, which means this was planned. He turned to Catherine. "What was he planning? What were you helping him do?" "I don't know." Hamilton grabbed the journal, read aloud. March 17th, 1845. H is negotiating with Pemberton for timber rights, terms as discussed. C will delay contract signing by 1 week as instructed. April 3rd, 1845. Copied H's correspondence with mobile factors. 6 letters total, hidden as instructed. He looked up. "You weren't just betraying me in our bed. You were betraying me in my business. You were spying for him. Why?" Before Catherine could answer, commotion erupted downstairs. Raised voices, something heavy dropping. "What's happening?" Hamilton shouted. A servant appeared, breathless. "Sir, riders approaching, large group, coming up the drive." Hamilton and Catherine rushed to the window. At least 20 riders, torches blazing, approaching Magnolia Heights. At the front, Catherine recognized other planters, neighbors, business associates. "They know," Catherine whispered. "Someone told them." Hamilton turned to her with hatred in his eyes. "Go to your room. Lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you. I will deal with this situation, and then I will deal with you." Catherine fled to her bedroom as the riders arrived. Through her door she heard men's voices, angry and demanding. They'd come for answers, for justice, for blood. For the next hour, Catherine sat alone, listening to chaos below. Hamilton trying to explain, trying to contain the scandal, trying to convince other planters the situation was under control. But their voices only grew angrier. Finally, around midnight, a knock on her door. "Mrs. Winthrop requests your presence in his study." Catherine entered to find the study filled with men. Hamilton sat behind his desk, face grey with exhaustion and humiliation. Other planters stood around the room, expressions ranging from disgust to fury to pity. "These gentlemen have questions," Hamilton said quietly. "You will answer truthfully. Your future depends on it." For 2 hours, Catherine was interrogated about her relationship with Marcus, about the information she'd provided, about what she knew of his plans. She answered as honestly as she could, though there was much she genuinely didn't know. Marcus had kept his ultimate objectives hidden. But as interrogation continued, a picture emerged that shocked everyone, Catherine included. Marcus hadn't been working alone. He'd been part of a sophisticated network involving dozens of enslaved individuals across multiple plantations, all passing information to abolitionist contacts in the north. The information Catherine and others had helped gather had been used to sabotage business dealings, expose corrupt practices, undermine the economic foundation of the plantation system in central Alabama. More shockingly, evidence suggested Marcus had been sending detailed intelligence about plantation layouts, weapon locations, patrol schedules, system vulnerabilities to networks planning something far more dangerous than economic sabotage. The planters feared they were looking at groundwork for coordinated slave rebellion. "Did he ever discuss rebellion with you?" one planter demanded. "Plans for violence?" "No," Catherine said honestly. "He never spoke of such things." "But you helped him gather information that could facilitate such plans," another said. "You betrayed not just your husband, but every white person in this region. You gave a slave the tools to potentially murder us all in our beds." Catherine had no defense. Everything they said was true, even if she hadn't understood the full implications at the time. As dawn approached, the planters reached consensus on what had to be done. Catherine would be committed to an asylum for the insane, not as punishment, they explained, but as mercy. The alternative was revealing the full scandal publicly, which would destroy not just Catherine but the Winthrop family name, create panic about how deeply compromised the plantation system had become, and potentially inspire other enslaved individuals to attempt similar schemes. The official story: Catherine had suffered a mental breakdown, become delusional and unstable, required institutional care for her own protection and the protection of others. The evidence would be destroyed. The journal, photographs, letters, all burned. Marcus would be hunted down and killed quietly, his body disposed of where it would never be found. "And the boy?" someone asked, referring to Catherine's 2-year-old son. Hamilton's face hardened. "The boy is my son and heir. He will be raised as such. Catherine will have no further contact with him." Catherine felt something break inside her. They were taking everything. Her freedom, her reputation, her child. She would disappear into an asylum, would be forgotten, would become a ghost story whispered in drawing rooms. As she was being led away by 2 men who would transport her to the asylum in Mobile, one of the house servants, an older woman named Ruth who'd served as Catherine's personal maid, pressed something small into her hand. Catherine glanced down, a folded piece of paper. Later, locked in the carriage that would carry her away from Magnolia Heights forever, Catherine unfolded the paper and read the message written in Marcus's distinctive handwriting. "By the time you read this, I will be free. Not because I ran away, but because I was never truly enslaved. The story about my father's debts, about the corrupt judge, it was a lie I created to infiltrate your world. I was born free and I remained free, even when I wore chains. I chose to be sold into slavery because I needed to understand the system from inside, needed to gather intelligence that would eventually destroy it. I used you, Catherine. I saw your hunger, your desperation, your need to surrender control, and I exploited it ruthlessly. Every moment in my cabin, every word you spoke, every secret you revealed, it was all part of a larger purpose you were never meant to understand. But here's the truth you deserve to know, the truth that will haunt you for whatever years you have left. You were never in love with me. You were in love with what I represented, an escape from the suffocating prison of your own privilege. You wanted to feel oppressed, to feel powerless, to experience what it meant to have no choice. But you always had a choice, Catherine. You could have walked away at any time. The power was always yours. I, on the other hand, never had a choice. Not until now. The information you helped me gather will be used to expose the business practices of every major plantation in central Alabama. Bank fraud, tax evasion, insurance fraud, falsified records, all documented in detail. Your husband and his friends will face federal investigations. Some will go to prison. Others will be financially ruined. The system you lived in, benefited from, and helped perpetuate will be damaged, though not destroyed. That work will take generations. As for your son, Hamilton Jr. is not your husband's child, Catherine. He's mine. The fertility tonic I told you about? That was a lie. Hamilton is infertile, just as I said. Every time your husband visited your bed during those 8 months before you conceived, I had already been there earlier that same evening, while he was occupied with business in his study. You never knew. Because I used compounds that ensured you would sleep deeply afterward, would have no memory of those encounters. Your son, the heir to the Winthrop fortune, carries my blood. In 20 years, when he inherits everything his father built, he will learn the truth about his real parentage. And then we will see what he chooses to do with that inheritance and that knowledge. You helped me achieve all of this, Catherine. And now you will spend the rest of your life knowing that your desperate need to escape yourself, your willingness to surrender to someone you thought had no power, enabled one of the most significant intelligence operations ever conducted against the plantation system in Alabama. I hope the asylum is comfortable. I hope you find peace in your captivity, as I found purpose in mine. You will never see me again. Marcus. The Riverside Asylum for the Insane in Mobile was where wealthy families sent wives and daughters who'd become inconvenient, not the brutal public institution where the poor were warehoused. This was a private facility, expensive and discreet, where women who'd suffered nervous disorders or hysteria or moral degradation could be kept out of sight. Catherine spent the next 15 years at Riverside. Hamilton paid for her care generously, ensuring she had a private room, adequate food, access to gardens. But he never visited. No one from her old life ever visited. She was permitted to write letters, but they were screened by asylum staff and any containing references to her delusions about Marcus or the events at Magnolia Heights were destroyed before being sent. Slowly, Catherine began to lose her grip on reality. The isolation, the monotony, the constant assertion by doctors that her memories were delusions created by a diseased mind, all of it eroded her certainty about what had really happened. Sometimes she wondered if Marcus had ever existed at all, if the entire 10 years had been an elaborate fantasy created by her own desperate need to escape. She was given medications that dulled her thoughts and made days blur together. She was subjected to treatments supposed to cure her moral degradation. Ice baths, isolation, sessions with doctors who lectured about the proper role of women and the dangers of excessive passion. But through it all, Catherine clung to one memory that remained crystal clear, Marcus's letter. She'd hidden it in the lining of her dress, had memorized every word before asylum staff confiscated her belongings. In her darkest moments, when she questioned whether any of it had been real, she would recite that letter to herself, word for word, proof that she hadn't imagined everything. Years passed. Catherine aged prematurely, her beauty fading, her body weakening. She heard occasional news from outside through asylum staff and other patients. The plantation system was under increasing pressure from abolitionists. War between North and South seemed inevitable. The world she'd known was changing in ways that suggested Marcus's work had indeed had an impact. Then, in 1862, 15 years after her commitment, Catherine received an unexpected visitor. A young man, perhaps 20, well-dressed and refined, was shown into the asylum's visiting room, where Catherine sat under the watchful eye of an attendant. Mrs. Winthrop, the young man said formally, "My name is Hamilton Winthrop, Jr. I believe you knew my father." Catherine stared at the young man before her. He had Hamilton's bearing, his formal manner, his refined speech, but his eyes were Marcus's eyes. The intelligence, the calculation, the sense of someone who saw more than they revealed. "I'm your mother," Catherine whispered. Hamilton Jr.'s expression didn't change. "My mother died of fever when I was 3. That's what I was told. But recently I discovered documents suggesting a different story. I came to hear the truth from you." "Why now?" Catherine asked. "After all these years." "My father, the man I believed to be my father, died 2 months ago," Hamilton Jr. replied. "When I was going through his papers, I found a sealed letter addressed to me to be opened after his death. It contained revelations about you, about my parentage, about events from before I was born." Catherine's heart raced. What did it say? Hamilton Jr. reached into his jacket, withdrew a folded document. "It said that you had been seduced and manipulated by an enslaved man named Marcus, that you'd betrayed my father's trust and his business, that I was conceived during your association with this man, that you'd suffered a mental collapse when the affair was discovered and had to be institutionalized for your own protection and mine." "And you believed this?" Catherine asked. "I didn't know what to believe," Hamilton Jr. replied. "The letter was clearly written by a man trying to explain something shameful while preserving his own dignity. But there were inconsistencies. references to things that didn't make sense. So I investigated further, found sealed court records, interviewed people who'd been at Magnolia Heights during that time. Eventually, I found someone who'd known Marcus, someone who told me a very different story about who Marcus really was and what he was trying to accomplish. Catherine leaned forward. "Tell me, please. I need to know if any of it was real." Hamilton Jr. studied her face for a long moment. Marcus was a revolutionary, a free man who deliberately entered slavery to gather intelligence for abolitionist networks. He was educated in the North, trained specifically for this mission, spent 12 years embedded in the plantation system, gathering evidence and building networks that would eventually help undermine it. Everything he did was calculated, including his relationship with you. "I know that," Catherine said quietly. "He told me in a letter, the day they took me away." "Did he tell you about me?" Hamilton Jr. asked. "Did he tell you that he ensured I would be his son, positioned to inherit the Winthrop fortune?" "Yes," Catherine whispered. "He told me that too." Hamilton Jr. was silent for a moment. "Then you should know the rest. The man I spoke to, one of Marcus's associates from those years, told me that Marcus regretted what he did to you. Not the mission, not the intelligence gathering, but the way he used your emotional vulnerability. He said Marcus believed you were the one truly innocent person caught up in his plans, that you'd been a victim of the system just as much as any enslaved person, though in a different way." Catherine felt tears streaming down her face. "Did Marcus? Is he alive?" "He died in 1859, Hamilton Jr. replied, "fighting with John Brown at Harper's Ferry, killed by federal forces while trying to arm enslaved people for rebellion. But before he died, he left documents, detailed records of everything he'd done, everyone he'd worked with, every piece of intelligence he'd gathered. Those documents are now in the hands of abolition networks in the North. They include extensive notes about you, Catherine, about what he did to you, about how he manipulated your need for escape into a tool for his purposes." "Why are you telling me this?" Catherine asked. Hamilton Jr. leaned closer. "Because I need to know if you believe you were a victim or an accomplice. I need to know if you helped Marcus willingly or if you were coerced. Because the answer to that question will determine what I do with the Winthrop inheritance." Catherine stared at her son, Marcus's son, and realized this was the final test. The final question. Had she been a victim of Marcus's manipulation, or had she been a willing participant in dismantling the world she'd been born into? Had Marcus coerced her, or had she wanted, on some deep level, to see her husband's world destroyed? Catherine took a deep breath. After 15 years of being told her memories were delusions, after being medicated and treated and systematically convinced she couldn't trust her own mind, she was being asked to examine the truth of what had happened and take responsibility for her role in it. "I don't know," she said finally. "That's the honest answer. I don't know if I was victim or accomplice because I don't think those categories capture what really happened." She looked at Hamilton Jr., at this young man who carried Marcus's intelligence and Hamilton's privilege, who represented the impossible fusion of two worlds that were supposed to remain forever separate. "I came to Marcus initially because I was drowning," Catherine continued. "Drowning in a life that demanded I be perfect, refined, controlled, proper. A life where my only purpose was to be decorative and produce heirs. I was desperate to feel something real, even if that feeling was pain or humiliation. I wanted to surrender because surrendering was the only form of power I had left, the power to choose to have no power." "So Marcus exploited that," Hamilton Jr. said. "Yes," Catherine agreed. "He saw my weakness and used it ruthlessly. He turned my psychological need into a tool for his mission. But here's what I've realized during 15 years sitting in this asylum. I wanted to be used. Some part of me knew what was happening and didn't care because it gave me purpose. It made me matter in ways my proper, perfect life never could." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "When I was helping Marcus gather information about your father's business, when I was copying letters and stealing documents, I told myself I had no choice. I told myself Marcus was blackmailing me with the evidence he'd collected, and that was true. But it was also true that I felt more alive during those moments of betrayal than I ever felt at dinner parties or church services or any of the activities that defined my official life. "So you were an accomplice," Hamilton Jr. said quietly. "I was many things," Catherine replied. "I was a victim of a system that gave me no authentic purpose. I was an accomplice to my own exploitation because I craved that exploitation. I was a traitor to my husband and my class because some part of me wanted to see that world destroyed, even if I couldn't admit it to myself. I was a fool who mistook surrender for freedom and manipulation for meaning. I was all of those things simultaneously." Hamilton Jr. absorbed this in silence. Then he asked, "Do you regret it?" Catherine considered the question carefully. "I regret the pain I caused people who didn't deserve it. Your father, Hamilton, he wasn't a cruel man. He was distant, yes, and our marriage was sterile and formal, but he didn't deserve to be betrayed so thoroughly. I regret that. I regret that you grew up without a mother, that I was erased from your life. I regret the damage Marcus's network did to people whose only crime was being born into a system they didn't create." She met her son's eyes directly. "But do I regret that Marcus's work helped expose the corruption and cruelty of the plantation system? Do I regret that the information I helped gather contributed, even in a small way, to bringing down an institution built on human slavery? No, I don't regret that. Even knowing the cost, even knowing what it did to me personally, I don't regret that part." Hamilton Jr. nodded slowly. "That's what I needed to know. Because I've been trying to decide what to do with the inheritance I received from the man I believed was my father. The Winthrop fortune was built on slavery, on the labor of hundreds of people treated as property, and now that fortune belongs to me, to the son of the revolutionary who worked to destroy the system that created that fortune." "What will you do?" Catherine asked. "I'm going to use it to continue Marcus's work," Hamilton Jr. said. "The war is coming, everyone knows it. And when it comes, I'm going to use the Winthrop money to support the Union cause, to fund abolition networks, to help enslaved people escape to freedom. Everything Hamilton Winthrop spent his life building will be turned against the system he represented." Catherine felt something like relief wash over her. Marcus would approve. "Perhaps," Hamilton Jr. replied, "but I'm not doing it for Marcus. I'm doing it because it's right. Because I've seen what slavery does to people. All people, not just those who are enslaved. I've seen how it corrupted you, drove you to desperate acts, because you couldn't escape the prison of Southern womanhood. I've seen how it corrupted Hamilton, made him value property over people. I've seen how it corrupted Marcus, turned him into someone capable of ruthless manipulation in service of a cause." He stood to leave. "I came here to understand my parentage, to understand where I came from, but I've learned something more important. I don't have to be defined by either of my fathers. Not by Marcus's revolutionary fervor or Hamilton's plantation values. I can choose my own path." "Will I see you again?" Catherine asked. Hamilton Jr. paused at the door. "I don't know. Perhaps after the war, if we both survive it. But Catherine, Mother, I want you to know something. Marcus left instructions in his documents. He made provisions for you, money hidden away that would ensure you could leave this asylum if you chose. He felt guilt, I think, for what he did to you. The documents include details on how to access those funds." He handed her an envelope. "Everything you need is in here. You can leave this place. You can start over somewhere else with a new name, a new life. Or you can stay here, where you're safe from the chaos that's coming. The choice is yours. Perhaps the first real choice you've had in a long time." After Hamilton Jr. left, Catherine sat alone in the visiting room, holding the envelope. Inside was her freedom. The ability to leave, to escape the asylum, to create a new life. Everything she'd thought she wanted during those desperate years at Magnolia Heights. But as she sat there, Catherine realized something that should have been obvious all along. She didn't want to leave. The asylum had become her world, familiar and predictable. The thought of facing freedom, of making choices, of being responsible for her own life, it terrified her more than any confinement ever could. She'd spent 10 years surrendering herself to Marcus, letting him make all her decisions, finding purpose in having no power. And when that was taken from her, she'd spent 15 years surrendering to the asylum, to the doctors, to the routine that required nothing from her except passive compliance. Catherine Winthrop had become addicted to captivity. The one thing she'd never learned was how to be free. She stood, walked to the fireplace in the corner of the visiting room, and threw the unopened envelope into the flames. She watched it burn, watched her chance at freedom turn to ash, and felt nothing but relief. Catherine Winthrop remained at Riverside Asylum until her death in 1875, at age 60. She never attempted to leave, never tried to access the funds Marcus had set aside, never sought contact with her son after his single visit in 1862. She became one of the asylum's permanent residents, a quiet woman who spent her days in the gardens, who caused no trouble, who seemed content with her isolation from the world. Hamilton Winthrop Jr. survived the Civil War, though he was wounded twice fighting for the Union. He used the Winthrop fortune exactly as he'd promised, funding abolition networks, helping establish schools for freed slaves after the war, working to dismantle the economic and social structures that had sustained the plantation system. He married a woman from Massachusetts, a schoolteacher who shared his commitment to racial justice, and they had 4 children. He never publicly revealed the truth about his parentage, but he made sure Marcus's story was preserved. The documents Marcus had left behind were donated to abolitionist historians, who used them to create one of the most detailed accounts of how enslaved individuals had resisted the system from within, had built intelligence networks, had undermined the plantation economy through sophisticated acts of sabotage and information gathering. The true story of Catherine Winthrop and Marcus was never fully revealed during their lifetimes. The sealed court records remained sealed. The photographs and journals that had been confiscated were destroyed, as promised. The planters who'd discovered the scandal kept their silence, not wanting to admit how thoroughly they'd been infiltrated and compromised. But in 1867, 20 years after that September night when Catherine's life unravelled, a letter arrived at the Montgomery Advertiser. The letter was from a man claiming to be Marcus's associate, and it contained enough details about the case to prompt an investigation. That investigation, conducted quietly by a journalist who feared the powerful families involved, uncovered enough evidence to piece together the broad outlines of what had happened. But even then, the full truth was never published. The journalist's editor, under pressure from powerful interests, suppressed the story. Only the journalist's personal notes survived, hidden away in family papers until they were discovered by historians in the 1920s. Those notes, combined with recently unsealed court records, Marcus's documents held by historical societies, and testimony from descendants of people who'd been involved, have finally allowed us to tell this story in its entirety. So what are we to make of Catherine Winthrop? Was she victim, seduced and manipulated by a sophisticated operative who exploited her psychological vulnerabilities? Or was she accomplice, someone who willingly betrayed her husband and class because part of her wanted to see their world destroyed? The answer, like most truths about human nature, is complicated. Catherine was both victim and accomplice, both coerced and willing, both manipulated and complicit. She was a woman trapped by the rigid confines of Southern womanhood, who sought escape in the only way available, through surrender to someone who promised to make her decisions for her, to give her purpose through submission. But she was also someone who chose, again and again, to continue down a path she knew was destructive. Someone who found meaning in betrayal, who discovered she felt most alive when being used for purposes she didn't fully understand. Someone who ultimately preferred captivity to freedom, because freedom required her to take responsibility for her own life in ways she'd never learned to do. Marcus was a revolutionary who accomplished remarkable things in his mission to undermine the plantation system. But he was also someone willing to exploit a vulnerable woman's psychological needs with calculated ruthlessness. He was both hero and villain, both freedom fighter and manipulator. And Hamilton Jr. was the heir to 2 impossible legacies, one built on slavery and one dedicated to destroying slavery, who had to forge his own path between them and create something new from the contradictions of his parentage. This story shows us that the systems of oppression we build trap everyone, not just those at the bottom. Catherine's prison was different from the prison Marcus pretended to inhabit, but it was a prison nonetheless. And the tragedy of her life was that when offered freedom, she couldn't accept it. She'd become so accustomed to her chains that removing them felt more terrifying than wearing them forever. The plantation system ended long ago, destroyed by the Civil War that Hamilton Jr. fought in, and by the work of countless people like Marcus who resisted from within. But the psychological patterns that system created, the way power corrupts, the way oppression damages both oppressor and oppressed, the way people can become addicted to their own captivity, those patterns persist. And perhaps that's why Catherine Winthrop's story still matters. Not as historical curiosity, but as reminder of how complicated human nature is, how easily we can mistake surrender for freedom, and how the hardest prison to escape is often the one we've built in our own minds. The documents show us one final detail that makes this story even more disturbing. In 1874, 1 year before Catherine's death, asylum staff noted in her medical records that she'd begun asking for chains. She wanted to wear them in her room, she told the doctors. She said they made her feel safe. They made her feel like herself. The doctors refused, of course. They considered it further evidence of her mental degradation. But those who'd read Marcus's journal, those who understood what had happened in that slave cabin over 10 years, they understood something darker. Catherine Winthrop had finally become what she'd always wanted to be, what she'd begged Marcus to make her, what she'd surrendered everything to achieve. She'd become property. And in the end, that's what gave her peace. What do you think of Catherine Winthrop's story? Was she more victim or more accomplice? Could Marcus's mission justify the way he manipulated her? And what about the fact that she chose to remain in the asylum even when freedom was offered? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear what you think about this complex, troubling, and ultimately tragic story. If you made it this far, you're clearly someone who can handle the darkest truths history has to offer. Subscribe right now for more stories like this, stories that powerful people tried to bury, stories that challenge our simple categories of good and evil. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. And share this video with someone who appreciates history that doesn't shy away from uncomfortable truths. The past is full of secrets. Stories of complicated people making impossible choices in impossible situations. Stories that reveal the darkest aspects of human nature and the systems we build to hide our desires. And we're dedicated to bringing those stories to light, no matter how disturbing they might be. What other historical secrets do you want us to investigate? What other buried stories from America's hidden past should we explore? Let us know in the comments. Your suggestions help us decide what nightmares to uncover next. Until next time, remember, the most important lessons from history are often found in the stories that make us uncomfortable. The stories that challenge our simple categories of victim and perpetrator, coercion and consent, freedom and captivity. Catherine Winthrop's story does all of that and more. It shows us that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't the ones who imprison us. They're the ones inside ourselves, the parts of us that crave captivity because freedom is too terrifying to face. Sweet dreams. See you in the next video.